in the New World. Virginians have rightly regarded the events of 1607 through 1611 with a measure of reverence. But this appreciation has not always been shared by our fellow Americans. Too often in the past, the national historical memory has been hijacked by idealistic moralist historians anxious to insist that Plymouth and New England were the paradigm of colonial and then national development. They have tended to regard the Virginian experience as a little unseemly, too much about making money and holding slaves and persecuting Native Americans and exploiting smoky, addictive habits. In contrast to the wholly Puritan effort to build a godly commonwealth set on a Massachusetts hill, many regarded Virginia as a subtropical sideshow. This, I believe, is historically imprecise. In fact, I believe that the Jamestown, Virginia paradigm was at least, if not far more predictive, or what I call symbolically prescient of American society, than its New England moralist rival. Let me explain what I mean. All of the major themes, good and bad, and there were some bad ones as well as good ones, that had shaped the American experience, emerged in Virginia in the early years, and were in full bloom before the first pilgrim set foot on icy, righteous Cape Cod. Number one, after the bitter experience with economic paternalism, Virginians pretty quickly eschewed starvation and at last settled on a commercial economy rooted in private property and the free market and trade. That some of that property was two-footed property is a blight on Virginia's history, but it doesn't take away from the reality that was the survival and brilliant organization of the market here on the James. We found a way to make money, we grew it, and we shipped tobacco very successfully. And that saved Virginia and the English colonies in America. That's the first thing. The second, relations with Native Americans were hostile and tense and predicted their near genocidal suffering until the dawn of the 20th century. So two things happened in Virginia already. First of all, the market economy is established, albeit with certain unseemly varieties and characteristics. And then the conflict between Native Americans. Virginians moved up the James and up the various peninsulas, and they pushed the Indians in front of them, and eventually out of the settled areas of Virginia. So that established this characteristic of American life that was the same for Native Americans until the early 20th century. Number three, Africans had already begun that forced immigration that would bring great riches to white America and would reveal the cognitive dissonance in our ideals and would eventually compel this nation into a titanic conflagration to resolve that dissonance. So, the market economy, conflict with the Native Americans, and slavery. Number four, Virginia pointed the way to a balanced place for religion. Virginia evolved as a secular society in which religion had influence, sometimes extravagant influence, but it did not dominate life as it did in New England. Anglicans, Puritans, Quakers, and even on occasion as the decades passed, Jews and Catholics who kept quiet and behaved themselves, enjoyed a rough approximation of the coming age of tolerance right here in Virginia. Market economy, conflict with Native Americans, slavery, balanced approach to religion. And finally, number five, with all its shortcomings and clear exclusion of important groups, women, blacks, etc., Virginia nailed a proto-democracy for white males on this continent. The Commonwealth and its leaders paved paving the way in establishing representative democracy that eventually became the American model. In the years following the Civil War, however, Virginia lost its appropriate place as the first among equals in the telling of the national myth, indeed, its place in the story of America. It did so for what I believe to be two important reasons. First of all, an intellectual reason, and two, for political purposes. First, the nature of the I'm a Calvinist, so I'm inside. My Jewish friends can tell Jewish jokes, I can tell Calvinist jokes, okay? The nature of the Calvinist experiment in New England was philosophical, evangelical, moralistic, and intellectual, in addition to the desire to make a fortune in the New World. In building the hill, the Massachusetts Hill, the wonderful society built on the Massachusetts Hill, these Calvinists came here to make money. There's no doubt about it. But they brought with them the Calvinist impulse in the direction of moralism and evangelical and intellectual progress. Almost immediately, New England began to establish colleges, first to ensure an educated ministry, but also to train its leaders. Southern society grew in more practical directions, and with some important exceptions, the College of William and Mary being the prime example, eschewed intellectual development. Fair or not, the intellectual fountainhead of America has traditionally resided on the banks of the Charles, not between the James and the York. Merchants and farmers, generally speaking, do not write history books. Historians, indeed academic historians, do. Now that's the first reason. The intellectual powerhouse of America throughout its history has generally been seen flowing out of New England. Secondly, and this is probably more important than the intellectual one, in 1861, Virginia joined the Confederacy. At the Republic's greatest moment of crisis, Virginia proved itself disloyal to the Union that had been created by its own sons. History's compliment to Virginia that its position in the ranks of the rebels transformed what would have been a simple police action into a 4-year bloody slugfest. History's penalty for Virginia was exquisitely severe. Its wide vistas were sundered with the western counties departing and becoming a separate state. Its lush farms trampled under the feet of marching armies. Its economy wrecked. Its sons blooded. Its capital burned. And, for our purposes this evening, it lost forever its undisputed status as the most national of states. The mother of presidents became a pariah. And for historians like me, unfortunately, Virginia lost its grip on the American imagination. When Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and John Adams needed a resolution for independence, they sent Richard Henry Lee to Virginia to get it, because they knew that if Virginia led in the Revolution, the rest of the colonies would follow. After 1861, that preeminence no longer existed. We can fight all we want to about the causes of the recent unpleasantness, if you wish, but that is the result. In the years following the Civil War, the myth of New England's preeminence began to overwhelm the clear indications of colonial history. Historians, many of whom were Union veterans holding little sympathy for Virginia, commanded the attention of thinking people. They gradually began to write the Commonwealth out of the story and relegated Jamestown and Richmond and this most national of states out and relegated it to a mere footnote. Unfortunately, before the Civil War, in the antebellum period, the two rival myths were sucked into the regional dispute over slavery.